have international participants, but we have also educators in the Turkey. So I will briefly summarize some of your slides. So they will read and listen, but to make sure to help you kind of take a quick break, I will briefly summarize some of your slides to translate your speech in Turkish.
Do you want me to pause after each slide? Will that help?
Not each slide. If maybe every 3 slides, that will be
okay.
Easy. So we don't want to interrupt the momentum. Like 3-4 slides, you can stop again. It will be very short summary of what you cover. Like 3-4 slides. Whenever you stop, I will have a like 20-second translation.
Okay.
All right. I am ready. Dean Hegedus is ready. And let me check with the moderators. Arkadaşlar hazır mıyız? Now in Ankara it is 16. It is 4 p.m. So there's a time difference.
7 hours, yeah.
Right, 7 hours. Yeah, you know.
You want me to start?
Right, let me check with them. Arkadaşlar ben başlıyorum.
Özgür hocam başlayın.
Okay, very good. Okay. All right, thank you. All right, welcome to the largest conference in Turkey. And over 12 years, this is the 12th international conference. And we are getting larger and larger every year. Thousands of participants participate the Eyfor. And today, I am very pleased to introduce Dean Hegedus. Before we start, we would like to say thank you for supporting and co-sponsoring the 12th International Conference, Eyfor. I would like to say a couple words about Dean Hegedus, our keynote speaker. First, we live in the age of STEM, and the school leaders, education leaders, they play key role to develop and prepare the STEM leaders. And as a STEM leader, Dean Hegedus has a significant contribution to the STEM field in the not just national and international arena. Dean Hegedus is also coaching leader. He support us. Thanks to his coaching and support, first time we developed the STEM Leadership Institute and prepare and train the many science and math STEM teacher. Also, in education, being the social justice is the key. And Dean Hegedus, we can call him as a social justice advocate with the scholarship, with the grant, in the student level, in the faculty level, he supports the social justice and leadership. And based on our 7 years work with the Dean Hegedus, he is a democratic and collaborative leader. Thanks to his partnership and his collaborative work, he worked with many departments, many program coordinators, and we get meet all the national accreditation standards in the teaching, leadership, counseling, library science. And when we prepare the leaders, we want them to have a vision. The vision is the key components of the leadership, and we can call Dean Hegedus a visionary leader. Thanks to his vision, now we have a lab school in our campus. And creativity and innovation. In the 21st century, in our school, we need a creative and innovative school leaders. And Dean Hegedus, he is a creative and innovative leader. Thanks to his leadership, we have the innovation room in our campus, in our College of Education. And he also initiated the Center for Teaching and Learning. And transformation. With the COVID-19, with the technology, with the STEM, we would like to have the transformative leaders. And I can call Dean Hegedus, he is a transformative leader. He helped us, many departments, many programs to transform, and even you create a brand new program from scratch in master program. Finally, he has an international background, and we want the leaders as a global perspective. And Dean Hegedus, with his international background, he always supported global innovations and global international partnership. That's why he is here today. We are in the morning, 9 a.m. in the US time, you are in the European time, and in Ankara it's 4 p.m. But thanks to Dean Hegedus, with this partnership, we start to work with the European and Turkish educators, school leaders, and Dean Hegedus always here as a support for the global partnership. Please welcome Dean Hegedus.
Thank you, Olcay. That was wow. I'll just sit down now. Thank you for that glowing introduction. Of course, we can't do it without inspirations like yourself. So it's a team effort, and I thank you for all your hard work, and thank you and the leadership of this conference for inviting us and inviting me, but inviting us as well. Southern Connecticut. I'm getting a little feedback. Okay, and inviting Southern Connecticut State University and the College of Education to collaborate on this important work. So thank you as well. I was just looking through my photos, and I was in Ankara just over 10 years ago in July. It was very hot. I remember I'm looking at photos now of my colleagues. We're all very, very hot and sweaty. We're at the Middle East Technical University. I don't know how far that is from where we are today, but I really enjoyed my time there at a conference I was presenting there as well. So it's almost 10 years before and after. So hopefully you enjoy my talk today. Let me begin. First, I want to start with, just as a context, the statement that Dan Gilbert discussed at his TED Talk. All of us are walking around with the illusion that our personal history has come to an end. And he goes on to say, we tend to view our current tastes and even personality traits as ones we will carry with us for the next 10 years. Even as we look back and see that over the previous 10 years, our tastes and personalities changed substantially. Throughout our lives, we fail to make use of that insight in predicting the future. He did a very interesting experiment. He did a lot of surveys, thousands of people, and he asked them, one example that he gives in his work is, how much would you pay now to see your current favorite musician play in 10 years' time? How much would you pay today to see your favorite musician in 10 years' time? And the average amount was $129. Then he asked the question, how much would you pay today to see your favorite musician from 10 years ago play this week? And the average was $80. It was a fascinating set of questions, because there's no, it's what income you have today. So income is not the factor there. And so we would pay less to see someone play who we thought was a favorite 10 years ago, and more in 10 years' time. So we need to, that's part of what he's saying. Our tastes change and evolve. And so we need to think about the art of imagining, not just remembering the past. So that's a context for the work that Olcay has just mentioned as well. And my work over 25 years, particularly in STEM and particularly in mathematics education. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today from a sociocultural perspective and a constructivist perspective. So I want to give you a little bit of context so it allows me to tell you about my theoretical lens and how I've looked on some of the classrooms that I have worked in. So constructivism has its origins in the assertion that what we see, hear, and remember are all acts of construction, and there are various stimuli that allow that. Constructivism encourages and acknowledges the legitimacy of students' own inventions and explanations. So we want to look at multiple ways of representing ideas. And in mathematics, that's particularly rich when we think about how we can use various representations to discuss function, for example. And the framework of constructivism does not see the problematic as having independent status, but merely it's an obstacle. I'm going to come back to this idea of an epistemological obstacle in a few years' time when we take a historical perspective on how we represent things. So Piaget is one of the main proponents of a constructivist theme, but Ernst von Glaserfeld refers to Piaget as one who neatly summarized the building of cognitive structures. And he says, intelligence organizes the world by organizing itself. There have been a variety of Russian cultural historical perspectives. And I reference here, this is some of the work of Michael Cole. So Vygotsky, as a main Russian writer, has accepted children as architects of their own understanding, similarly to Piaget, but he stressed the role of social interaction as really critical. And social interaction and cultural practices in shaping the course of human development, which is referred to as social constructivism. And my examples today is more a lens that I have used in thinking about how children learn and think, and how teachers think and learn about their children, and particularly for this conference, what our responsibility is in leadership positions to understand and acknowledge that. So I offer this as a perspective, the lens that I use. Vygotsky differs in the treatment of language, and he believes that child speech is not a personal affair, but speech is very social and communicative, both in its origins and its intent.
Can I translate this part?
Sure. Yeah, I'll pause there.
So, dinlediniz. Türkiye'yi en baştan Türkiye'yi bildiğini, Ankara'ya 10 yıl önce geldiğini, ODTÜ'de konferansa katıldığını söyledi ve burada da birçok Türk akademisyenle ortaklık yaptığından bahsetti. Yani yaklaşık 30 yıldır sistem üzerine çalışıyor ve hani ilk baştan hani geçmişini unutan geleceğini bilemezden yola çıkıp deneyimler, sistemden önce bizim öncelikle öğrenme nasıl oluyor, onları anlamamız, öğrenmenin teorilerini bilmemiz gerektiğinden bahsetti. Ve deneyimler önemli. Öğrenmek için deneyimli öğrencilere farklı deneyimler, sadece görerek değil, dokunarak, görerek, duyarak farklı deneyimler kazandırmaktan bahsetti. Ve dünyayı anlamadan önce kendimizi anlamamız gerektiğinden bahsetti. Ve ilişkiler, öğrencilerin kendileri arasında anneleriyle, babalarıyla, öğretmenleri olan ilişkiler öğrenmede önemli rol oynuyor. Sözün özü, şimdi sistem diyoruz ama sistemden daha önce bizim gerçekten bu öğrenme nasıl oluyor onu anlamamız, idrak etmemiz gerektiğinden başladı. Evet. Thank you, Dinhegas.
Thank you. So that's a little bit of the theoretical framework that I use. And what is also important is how we think about artifacts. That's very important when looking we're using technology in the classroom and also having a cultural perspective. Artifacts are often thought of as material objects, and we often think of these in terms of tools, or they're assimilated with tools. But there are a variety of ways cultural theorists think about artifacts. Artifacts are something that can also be modified over history into something that is a goal-directed action that humans act with. Artifacts can also be conceptual, not just material. Artifacts, and I think we need to pause on this point, artifacts are also can be thought of as culture. And that's where I'm bringing in today, that we have to think very carefully about culture and how it frames the classroom. Is culture external? This is the big anthropological debate what is culture? Is culture external to the individual, sort of products from prior human activity? We think about when we move when we move countries, like Alj and I have both done. We've come and we may carry things with us. We say we brought this from our culture. This is what our parents or grandparents used to use. So we can externalize culture, but also we can think internally culture as a pool of beliefs, of knowledge. And so this is the big debate. Which side are we on? Are we thinking about culture externally, internally? And what is the dividing point of those? So again, I think this is a crucial point for leaders, whether they are a principal of a building or a district, a school district, or an educational authority or agency. We have to think about what are the cultures of those classrooms and buildings, and what are the artifacts that the learners and the teachers bring to the classroom. That's a natural pause for me, LJ, before I move to some historical perspectives. Did you want to say anything?
Yes, thank you. Burada benim için de yeni bu dekanın özellikle sistemle alakalı artifact dediği, yani eserler, kullandığımız malzemeler, kullandığımız ürünler, çocuklarımızın ürettiği ürünler. Yani böyle öğrenmede eser çok önemli. Kullanılan materyaller ve sadece bunun materyalistik değil, kültür de çok önemli ve okulun içindeki öğrenme kültürü, okulun liderlerinin görevi bunların bir parçası. Yani aslında bu ilk konuşmasının ilk kısmında STEM education var, STEM var ama bizim önce eğitimci olarak, liderler olarak bu teorileri, yani bu öğrenme teorilerini, eserleri, yaklaşımları anlamamız gerekiyor ki STEM eğitimi bir fark yaratsın, bir anlam kazansın. Thank you.
Thank you. And now let us think of some historical perspectives as well, which I think are critical to how we think about STEM in classrooms. This is some of the work by myself and Luis Moreno Homala from Simba Staff in Mexico. We've written a lot about this. Happy to share some references on this. We talk about historically what has happened with representations. We think about the history of writing, beginning with pictographs to alphabets, alphabetas to the printing press. All of this development has taught us the following: that the new technologies that come along over thousands of years transforms the practice and redefines the nature of that practice. It redefines that practice. We think from a cultural perspective, what does that mean? That technology has had a transformative impact. And I ask the question, how do leaders acknowledge such transformation through a lens, a historical lens, versus a budgetary lens? So think very carefully, what does it mean for me to bring in a transformative technology into our classrooms? You get to see the slide again. I'm not quite sure why. And then let us think about how the medium within which we express ourselves and distribute knowledge has developed over time. What has happened? Think about the media with which we instantiate our knowledge. That began with clay. That moved then to papyrus, then to paper, then to the screen, then to what we now think of as these small, I call them biological devices that we use, our iPhones or our cell phones, our smartphones. Each of these historical evolutions has made humans' efforts to communicate more expressive. We can express ourselves in ways that we haven't been able to do historically. We need to think again. That is very transformative in how knowledge is distributed. Here's the printing press. This is around 1440. This is Gutenberg's printing press, and it led to a rapid dissemination of religious matter in the vernacular. But it also inspired a new form of literacy. But it wasn't until the 19th century, 500 years later, that we had the flatbed printing press, Koenig's flatbed printing press, which revolutionized mass production of literature and widespread literacy. So that was in the 19th century. And so we may have analogs today. It's not just about disseminating knowledge, but how we act online and what we do online in what we presently call social media. I've also written about the various stages that we use in terms of how static or inert. This is a Mesopotamian clay tablet. How we then move to various forms of kinesthetics. This is a simple Excel spreadsheet where we can click up and down to change things. Aesthetics play a fundamental role as computational power increase, the use of color also, and other forms that are more dynamic and more fluid. This is a haptic device that I've used in my work with young children in allowing them to touch and feel mathematical objects. So not just seeing things, but using a variety of modalities, multiple modalities. And we've learned a lot from research with children with special needs and learning needs, that we have to use various modalities. If they are partially sighted or blind, then we need to think about other forms of modalities. We've been doing this for decades, but we haven't always been doing that in mainstream classrooms, where we have to think about a wide variety of learners. And here's why. As a mathematician, graphs are everywhere. Graphs are in the newspapers, online. Charts or graphs are there all the time. Here's one that we've been looking at quite a lot over the past year. This is linked to the number of cases of COVID and the number of the coronavirus deaths. These represent the same data, but if you look at one, you might think things are leveling out. But this is a rate graph. This is deaths per day. And so over time, if we have the same constant rate, things are going to go up. We want to see rates go towards zero. So again, here we have a classic example of where we see representations of very important data that informs the general public, that informs society, but they can be misinterpreted or misused. So when people ask me, what is the role of mathematics in society? We've got it all around us. People are having to make informed decisions about data. So we have to think very carefully about what the technologies we use, what is represented, and how are those interpreted through a variety of learners' eyes and teachers' eyes. I'm going to pause there.
Right, thank you. Şimdi bu bölümünde Dean Hegedus tarihsel gelişim ve değişimden bahsetti. Şimdi sistemi anlamadan önce ilk olarak öğrenme kuramlarını, teorilerini anlamamız gerekiyor ve daha sonra eğitim liderleri ve eğitimciler tarihsel gelişim ve değişimi anlamamız gerekiyor ve gerçekten bilginin dağıtımını değişti. Önceden yapılan yazılar, yayınlar ve şu andaki basın yayın tamamen değişti. Yani clay to screen, yani bu hamurdan, çamurdan dijital ekrana geçmek. Yani baktığımız zaman ilk 1900'lü yılların başında hamur, çamurdan eğitim şu anda tamamen ekran, dijital ekranlara geçti, teknolojiye geçti. Duran nesnelerden, öğrenmeden, bakaraktan ziyade artık hareketli animationlar, simulationlar, görsel eğitimler öne çıktı ve günümüzde STEM anlamak için, kullanmak için öğrenme kuramlarını anlayacağız. Daha sonra görselle data kullanmayı günlük hayatta ki datanın ve görsel eğitimin önemini idrak ettikten sonra önümüzdeki STEM, niçin STEM olduğunu anlayabiliriz. Thank you, Dean Hegedus.
Thank you. And so I want to conclude with a few thoughts and questions and leave you with some questions as well in terms of a leadership frame. Audrey talked at the start about my perspective, a social justice perspective. I also think through a critical theory lens, and critical pedagogy supports theories and practices that drive teachers and students to acknowledge the relationships between ideology, power, culture, and social structures. And these lead to practices that produce and reproduce knowledge. This was a definition by Stinson and Wagan. Paulo Freire as well thinks in terms of epistemology that theories and practices that promote a humanizing education through which men and women take themselves in hand, become agents of curiosity, become investigators, become subjects in an ongoing process and quest for the revelation of the why of things and facts. I think sometimes we lose sight of that. The culture of a classroom should be to enhance agents of curiosity, that we become investigators, that it's good to ask questions about why of things and facts. So what are the epistemological roots of our civilization, of our subject matter? As a mathematician, some of the work that we teach in schools today goes back hundreds of years. And yet we don't always think about how these ideas around algebra and geometry evolved over time. What were the struggles that mathematicians were having? Where did these obstacles lie that we are now teaching in a very neat, well-bound curriculum? That curriculum encompasses a lot of challenges about how people thought of our world that we live in. So for leaders, leadership needs to take on an epistemological perspective. Leaders need to understand that there's a history of the knowledge and the curriculum that is being taught in schools. Here's an example. For many years, we thought the world was flat. And it wasn't until a few hundred years ago that mathematicians begin to think about other forms of representation that challenged and ripped apart the very structures that people had been situated in. Gauss and Lobachevsky claimed that the flat geometry, Euclidean geometry, was similar to other sciences, but it didn't contain the truth about physical space. The idea that we can think about sets of parallel lines that cross or don't meet was a fundamental challenge. And if that did not happen, those epistemological objects, if those were not challenged, we would not have had non-Euclidean geometry and a different kind of geometry. Without that, advances would not have been made in science in the 20th and 21st century. So thinking about, this is a concrete example from the history of mathematics as well, in terms of how we think and represent ideas. So I'm going to conclude with a few questions, but I'll pause there because it's a natural change before we move into some questions for you that I wish to ask.
Yes, I take my notes. Şimdi bu kısmı eleştirisel pedagojiden bahsetti Dinegades. Yani bu sistem öyle binlerce, on binlerce dolarlık malzemeleri alıp robot yapmak değil. Sistem dediğimiz zaman eleştirisel pedagoji, merak etmek, merak uyandırmak, neden, nasıl oldu, niçin oldu, meydan okumak, gerçeklere, şu andaki yaşananlara meydan okumak. Mesela dediğim gibi milyonlarca insan yıllarca uzun süre dünyanın düz olduğuna inandı. Yani bunu bir, iki gün değil, yıllarca yüz binlerce insan dünyayı düz olarak kabul etti. Yani orada neden, niçin meydan okuyan akademisyenler, eğitimciler olmasa biz şu andaki yere gelemeyecektik. O zaman yani sistem dediğimiz zaman hani teknoloji, pahalı araçlar, robotlar değil de eleştirisel düşünen, meydan okuyan, yanlışa meydan okuyan, merak eden, niçin, neden sorularını soran gençler üretmek bizim sistem dediğimiz zaman aklımıza gelmesi gereken konular. Thank you, Dinegades.
Thank you very much. And to conclude with the various perspectives that I try to introduce briefly this morning, and some of the examples from history of mathematics, I want to think about these questions. Why do schools remain unequal? This was written over 40 years ago. And I wonder how much of it is still relevant. I'd be interested in how much of it is relevant in Turkey. Schools are not concerned with equality, but in response to developing needs of capitalism. I need to educate to be able to have an educated workforce, to get a profession, to get a job. But that occurs at the same time that educational inequality is there. So maintaining education inequality was necessary to reproduce the required class structure of capitalism across generations and generations. Class structure has not shown much signs in general of change in the past 100 years. And inequality in schools has roots in such class structures that it not only serves to legitimize, but also reproduce. Now you may say, I have schools that do, that is an historical consequence, and we've made a lot of progress towards equality in schools and creating access for all. But I challenge how much of that is still there, particularly when you think about the role of mathematics, science, and technology across all learners in schools, and what that means and what the opportunities are. So for leadership, think about what has been what I call catastrophic failure sometimes. All too often, I've seen technology as a prosthetic device. Technology is something that props up old practices and doesn't transform and challenge new ways. So, bringing in a certain hardware or software because it's the latest thing from some company, whether it be Apple or Microsoft, but it actually doesn't fundamentally change. One is not always looking at the affordances of the technology and how that can create accessibility for all learners. I think about the glass screen, the computer screen, the little squares that we're part of at the moment, as not transparent, but it can obfuscate the essence of learning. We've seen throughout COVID that whilst we've pivoted to online, this is also in some schools and in some high-risk school districts has further increased the inequality because of the lack of accessibility to high-speed connectivity and lack of ability to have access to a conducive learning environment. We're not always understanding the affordances, I just mentioned that before, of what we're doing and we seem to be preoccupied with what is the new gadget, what is the new technology, what tool do I need to learn about now? And then we look at professional development sometimes, and that has the same structure and approach. What do you want to do? Versus what does the student, how do I access many different forms of student learning and abilities? So thinking about the multimodal experience, here are some questions I want you to think about. What are the learning objectives? That's where we should start when we're thinking about technology in classrooms. What are the affordances of the technology? How do we expose, realize, and engage our students and our families and teachers and leaders? And what specifically entices or draws us to these new technologies that can address some of the criticisms, the catastrophic failures that I just mentioned? These are leadership questions. These are strategic decisions need to be made that really thinks hard about the affordances of technology. And for those interested in teacher collaboration and professional development, we've done a lot around the idea of communities of practice. I also wish to stress that epistemic distancing is also something that's very powerful, where we can be reflective on our own practice and reflective of one's own teaching, and being able to think about our teaching from a distance, whether it's looking at ourselves critically or looking at others. And then again, from a leadership perspective, we need to build this form of critical thinking within school, to build school capacity, to allow teachers to learn whilst teaching versus sending them out always to external professional development. You can develop a critical practice within your own school systems to develop that awareness, to be able to share critically about the use of, in this case, certain technologies in math or science classrooms or whatever classroom you're in, and to have that within a school system. So in summary, I want you to think about what are the choices and decisions that I'm making. Think about the cultures that are within the classroom, the belief structures, and think about history in terms of how a lot of the curriculum that we are thinking has a history, and that history has had various obstacles in its past in terms of its development and evolution. So I wish to thank you in conclusion, and teşekkür ederim. I hope that was good enough, but I wish to thank you all for your time and collaboration.
No, Dean Higgins, thank you. And the written and speaking, it is in 100% accurate for the pronunciation and write-up. So thank you.
I had a little help from a colleague who is from Ankara in Turkey as well.
Okay, that makes sense. So bizler teşekkür ederiz. Şimdi son olarak da Dean Higgins, sosyal adaletsizlik neden var? Yani okullara baktığı zaman Amerika'da sosyal adaletsizlik ana merkezi. Gerçekten sadece Türkiye değil, Avrupa değil, Amerika'da sosyal adaletsizlik eğitimde çözülemedi halen. Çünkü kapitalizm, yani bu teknoloji sistem daha çok bir onların kullanıldığı tüketim yeri. Yani okullar sistemi üretmiyor. Genelde kapitalizmin parçası olarak bunları sürekli tükettiği için o yüzden okullarda sistem kapitalizmin bir parçasından olduğu için sosyal adaletsizlik, sosyal eşitlik, eğitimde eşitlik eğitimin birinci maddesi değil. Hani bir teknoloji sistem derken onun zararlarından da bahsetti ve kafa karıştıran teknoloji aslında ne kadar kuvvetli, önemli bir kaynak olsa da aynı zamanda kafa karıştıran, öğrencilerin zamanını çalan bir alet olduğundan da bahsetti. O yüzden bizlerin, özellikle eğitim liderlerin, eğitimcilerin kaç para ödeyeceğiz? Yani aslında attığın taş ürküttüğün kurbağalara değiyor mu? Yani hedeflerimiz nelerdir? Bu kadar yatırım buna değecek mi? Neyi, ne zaman? Çok fazla araç var, çok fazla teknoloji var. Bunu neyi, nasıl, ne zaman, nerede kullanacağımızı işbirliği yapmamız gerektiğini, eğitimciler, eğitim liderleri işbirliği yapması gerektiğini ve ona göre kapasiteyi geliştirmek gerektiğini söyledi. Ve davetinizden teşekkür ettiğini sizlere buradan it is 9:40 since we spent some for translation. It is 40-minute presentation. So once again, we appreciate your time, your support, and being co-sponsoring this event. We hope for the next, for the future years, we will invite you in person. Conference in Antalya, Istanbul, or Ankara. We hope to see you soon, and you and your families always welcome to Turkey as our guest.
Thank you very much. Have a great conference.
Thank you. Evet arkadaşlar, eğer sorunuz varsa dekana if they have any question, they can email you regarding the presentation. So this is Dean Higgins' email. Dekana email atabilirsiniz. Benim de eğer yardımcı olabileceğim bir konu varsa ben de elimden geleni yaparım. Right. Thank you. We are all set. Enjoy the rest of the day, Dean Higgins. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eğer sorunuz varsa dekana if you have any question, they can email you regarding the presentation. So this is Dean Higgins' email. Dekana email atabilirsiniz. Benim de eğer yardımcı olabileceğim bir konu varsa ben de elimden geleni yaparım. Right. Thank you. We are all set. Enjoy the rest of the day, Dean Higgins. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eğer sorunuz varsa dekana, if you have any question, they can email you regarding the presentation. So this is Dean Hegel's email. Dekana email atabilirsiniz. Benim de eğer yardımcı olabileceğim konu varsa ben de elimden geleni yaparım. Thank you. We are all set. Enjoy the rest of the day, Dean Hegel's. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eğer sorunuz varsa dekana, if you have any question, they can email you regarding the presentation. So this is Dean Hegel's email. Dekana email atabilirsiniz. Benim de eğer yardımcı olabileceğim konu varsa ben de elimden geleni yaparım. Thank you. We are all set. Enjoy the rest of the day, Dean Hegel's. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eğer sorunuz varsa dekana, if you have any question, they can email you regarding the presentation. So this is Dean Hegel's email. Dekana email atabilirsiniz.